ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm David Marsland, and this is The Leader Weekends. Every Saturday, we bring you a bonus episode of our business podcast, How to Be a CEO. This is a cut-down version, so hit the link in the show notes to hear the full thing, or search your podcast provider for How to Be a CEO. There are new episodes every Monday morning. When a venture capitalist hits big with a company that seemed to come out of nowhere, it can feel like they're using some kind of a crystal ball, that they have magic abilities to spot where a potential huge name like, let's say, Deliveroo will come from and get in early. The reality is, there's a bit more science to the decision making.
What we saw was that when Deliveroo was first kind of getting to market, all of a sudden you could buy a cheap Android phone that was pretty good for about 50 quid. And you had the ability of having, a computer in every driver's pocket, and then you can make sure the drivers are a lot more productive. And that was the real question that we thought was being answered, that the time was now.
Rob Kniaz is the co-founder of Hoxton Ventures, and backing Deliveroo was one of their early successes. A decision made not just by looking at a smart idea for a company, but the world into which it was entering and assessing how that company was equipped to take advantage and change it.
For any company in a sector, you look and say, are these folks able to be among the top 2 or 3 in the world? Is there some edge that we think gives these folks the chance to be a winner and not just a local also ran?
I'm David Marsland from the Evening Standard. Rob's going to be appearing at our SME Expo, which is being held at Excel London on April 25th and 26th. He'll be talking with a panel of experts about the tech of the future, so you can probably expect a lot of talk about ChatGPT. We may as well start in that sector. What is the most exciting area that he's looking at for investment right now?
I think it's pretty broad. I hate to be tied down to any one area, but I still think we're in the early days of the ability of having essentially a supercomputer in your pocket to do amazing amounts of things. So things like generative AI have become really hot in the past 6 months, where you can type in a few words and get a beautiful image that looks photorealistic, and frankly the quality is probably improving 20% a month. So stuff like that's kind of tangible and real and interesting. But again, I think you're seeing kind of all parts of the world getting reinvented by software in different ways, and people trying to find economies, whether it's using machine learning for simple things like data entry, or whether it's using computing power to look at how proteins fold in the biology space. Software is eating the world, like Mark Andreessen says. I still think we're in a rather interesting area where nearly every business I talk to, or anyone I meet at the dad's nights at my kids' school, software is changing their business in some way, whether it's just basic SaaS stuff they're using, or their core business is becoming digitized. We're in a very interesting time.
How far ahead of time are you looking? So everyone's looking at AI, everyone's looking at bio right now. Are you thinking, right, in a year's time this is going to be hitting really big? Or do you get taken by surprise?
I think you always get taken by surprise. No VCs can really see the future. All we can do are surround ourselves with people in the industry that have a view, people that are deep in any domain space, and then kind of extrapolate on what we've seen before. So with generative AI, for example, it's clear to me that the pace of the underlying data quality is probably getting better at 10 or 15% a week, which means that if you're a maker of products, so if you're making photos or whatever it is, or you're making images of celebrities, it's sort of like in the early computing days that when you bought a new Intel CPU, it actually made a difference, right? Going from a 286 to a 386 made everything faster, and it made Windows runnable. So you want to sit on top of these platform gains, where when you have the Moore's law type gains, where something is getting incredibly faster and cheaper, how do you take advantage of that and find a way of capitalizing on the fact all the stuff underneath you is getting cheaper and faster with every passing period?
One of Hoxton's most notable successes was probably in Deliveroo, which you guys spotted really early on. What caught your attention there?
What we really saw is, and for every deal we ask ourselves, like, why now? What's changed in the market that makes this the time to surf in that market? And again, sometimes there's commercial changes or some factors. It's rare that a business pops out of nowhere and reinvents something without there being some kind of external rationale for why it's happening now. And what we saw with Deliveroo in the very early days was that if you think about the dot-com boom and all the crazy ideas back then, there was a company called Cosmo in New York that was doing food delivery. And it was really cool if you're wealthy in New York. Literally a guy on a bike had a pager. He got a page that said, call this number. He called the dispatch. Dispatch said, go to, West 55th Street at the bodega, pick up, this, that, and the other, and bring it to West 58th Street. And it worked, but it was really inefficient. And what we saw was that when delivery was first kind of getting to market, all of a sudden you could buy a cheap Android phone that was pretty good for about 50 quid, which was a real game changer. Because, up until then, to get a phone with an accelerometer and the ability to track, to track everything very closely was pretty expensive. So all of a sudden you had the ability of having, a computer in every driver's pocket. And then if you think about what makes any delivery business work, it's the volume of, how many deliveries can you do per hour. So if you all of a sudden can keep track of the drivers very closely, you can route them, you can figure out when they're lost. Some of them may, have poor language skills and get lost and don't know how to call for help, or don't know how to or don't have an SMS function in their phone, or a WhatsApp function, whatever it is. All of a sudden, with a cheap Android phone, you can make sure the drivers are a lot more productive. And that was the real question that we thought was being answered, that the time was now, because you could do a lot more on the software side, and it wasn't a very cumbersome process like pagers. It was down to the point of, if a driver decides they want to stop off and have a cigarette, they can do that, but it becomes obvious in the app that they're not working at that time.
Could do with a break myself. So let's do that. On to the ads. Go have a look at smexpo.co.uk, where you'll find the lineup for the shows. People like previous guests on this podcast, including Deborah Meaden and Levi Roots. And you can see them all for free. smexpo.co.uk.
And when you back a company like Deliveroo or any company, how involved do you then get in the future of that company and how that company's working? Or do you just go, we believe you, here's the money to make that thing happen? Or do you step in and go, maybe try this or look at this angle as well?
Well, I think we try and provide, sensible feedback. But again, as VCs, we're by definition minority investors. So we don't really control the company in any meaningful way. We have defensive provisions as board members often to protect the value of the shares. But in general, I'd say that we hope that founders want to come to us to chat about things. But, it's their business at the end of the day. We can raise our hands if we think we've seen the story before and, mistake is being made, or, again, in a good functioning company, usually our feedback is useful enough where the founders will come and say, hey, what do you think of this? Or who do you know in this space? We try and bring in people that we know that are going to be useful to the founder, whether it's a partner or an advisor, or, someone they can work with downstream in some way. But I think at the end of the day, if you expect the success of a company to depend on you, it's probably a bad investment. That frankly, you kind of want to invest with the sense of, if I get hit by the bus tomorrow, the company will be just fine. Maybe I can create some tailwinds, but, I'm not going to be the one that makes a difference in the company enough to really say it makes a difference for an investor.
Why did you not just found Hoxton, but to go, I want to be a venture capitalist? I can't imagine, when you were 8 years old, you thought you were sitting there in your classroom going, you know what, I'm going to be a VC.
I think if you talk to people in the industry, nearly everyone kind of stumbles into it. I think part of it was being in Europe, that, I came over here with Google for a while, or for what I thought would be a short while, and kind of saw the opportunity that the market, the talent was really good. And comparatively compared to California, the density of capital available was really low. I joined Fidelity, who at the time, it's been renamed Eight Roads now, but it was a earlier stage venture capital fund here in London. So kind of learned the ropes of venture. And, frankly, it's an interesting way of getting exposure to lots of ideas without having to pick one necessarily. So, if there's one thing I was absolutely passionate about, I probably ought to, go found a company in that space. But it's also good for the ADHD sufferers that it lets you have a portfolio of lots of different things to focus on and give you some kind of, diversity around, looking at different things or being able to explore different sectors. So it's a very privileged job in many ways, because we can, write checks and, get to pick who we think can be winners. But it's kind of the trade-off that everyone kind of comes into it to a different way. Oftentimes it's usually through having made a company and made a lot of money on that company and then looking to put your money to work afterwards. So that's probably the most common way. Others are, simply folks that started out with, 2,000-pound angel checks and kind of slowly built their portfolio up and made 50 different investments, or, had an inheritance and split it up 50 different ways. And, some people are totally grassroots, they become investors that way. And if they're good, then more money comes in. Some people start rich and end up richer. Some people start rich and blow it all. But usually it's access to capital that's usually helpful. And otherwise for us, it was basically around the ability to raise capital, given we worked at funds prior.
But it must be, in comparison to founding a company that creates something and goes to venture capitalists for money, it must be uniquely difficult to set up a venture capitalist firm. Surely there must be all kinds of complications and things that people wouldn't expect.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically selling, it's like doing a pre-seed round for the first 10 years of your company. So again, I don't expect any sympathy because I don't think VCs necessarily deserve sympathy, but yeah, it's a tough product to sell. You have, a reputation and a track record, and you're selling your track record. So it's very hard to enter, especially as a newer manager, because you almost by definition don't have much track record. Some people may get lucky and have one like home run very early in their career. I mean, I think the best advice I ever heard for venture was, the best thing you can do is to get really lucky in the first couple of years of your career and have some kind of home run, because that makes it a lot easier. That success begets success. But yeah, it's really salesmanship on both sides. Like, can you convince investors why you're a trustworthy place for them to put their money? And different investors have different parameters for what they look for. And then from founders, likewise, in any functioning market, it's you kind of selling yourself to founders around why founders should take your money at your price versus anyone else out there. So it's a real sales job at the end of the day. So you're as good as a car salesman sitting in the lot, that there's product, you can go and, if you can prove you can sell, then you make your commission. And if you don't, you starve.
That was Rob Kniaz from Hoxton Ventures. Check out standard.co.uk/business for more news, interviews and analysis. How to Be a CEO is back on Monday morning. We'd love to see you there.